No one came to her funeral until the sheriff read her will out loud. No one came to her funeral until the sheriff read her will out loud. The church bells of Cedar Ridge rang out across the dusty Main Street, their bronze voices carrying over empty hitching posts and weathered wooden sidewalks. But today, those bells weren't calling people to worship. They were tolling for the dead. And inside the small white chapel, where sunbeams struggled through dirty windows to light up rows of empty pews, a funeral was about to begin that nobody wanted to attend. Eleanor Whitman lay in her simple pine coffin at the front of the church. No flowers decorated the altar. No mourners filled the benches. Just 3 people sat in that hollow space: Sheriff Tom Bradley, Preacher Davies, and old Martha Jenkins, who swept the church floors every Sunday morning. The silence was so thick you could almost taste it, mixing with the dust motes that danced in the afternoon light. Sheriff Bradley shifted uncomfortably on the hard wooden pew, his spurs jingling softly against the floor. In his 23 years, wearing the badge in Cedar Ridge, he'd seen plenty of funerals, but this one felt different, wrong, somehow. Eleanor Whitman had lived in this town for over 30 years, yet here she was about to be buried with barely anyone to witness it. "I suppose we should get started," Preacher Davies whispered, his weathered hands trembling as he opened his black leather Bible. The pages were yellow with age, and they rustled like autumn leaves as he turned to find the right passage. But something in Sheriff Bradley's gut told him to wait. His father had always called it lawman's intuition, that feeling when the pieces of a puzzle don't fit together quite right. Something about this whole situation bothered him, like a burr under a saddle that you can't quite reach. "Hold on there, Preacher," Bradley said, raising his hand. "Before we lay Mrs. Whitman to rest, I need to read something." She left very specific instructions about her will, and she wanted it read at her funeral service, no matter how many people showed up. He reached into his vest pocket and pulled out a thick envelope sealed with red wax. Eleanor's initials were pressed deep into that seal, and as he broke it open, the sound seemed to echo through the empty church like a gunshot on a quiet morning. Martha Jenkins looked up from her worn prayer book, curiosity flickering in her tired old eyes. Even Preacher Davies paused in his preparations, watching as the sheriff unfolded several pages of Eleanor's careful handwriting. Bradley's eyebrows raised as he scanned the first few lines. Then, clearing his throat, he began to read in the strong, clear voice that had announced verdicts and delivered bad news for more than 2 decades. Last Will and Testament of Eleanor Margaret Whitman, written in sound mind and body on September 15th, 18th. The words seemed to hang in the dusty air like smoke from a dying campfire. Outside, a tumbleweed bounced down Main Street, scratching against the church windows like skeletal fingers trying to get inside. "To the people of Cedar Ridge who chose not to attend my funeral," Bradley continued, his voice growing stronger with each word, "I want you to know that I understand completely. You see, I haven't been entirely honest with you all these years. In fact, I've been keeping secrets that will change everything you thought you knew about this town, about your neighbors, and about me." The sheriff's voice caught for just a moment. Even he couldn't believe what he was reading. Martha Jenkins dropped her prayer book, and it hit the floor with a sound like thunder in the silent church. You all thought I was just a strange old widow who kept to herself. I know what you whispered behind closed doors, that I was unfriendly, maybe even a little touched in the head. Some of you probably figured I was just bitter about losing my husband. But the truth is something none of you could have imagined. Sheriff Bradley's hands started shaking as he turned to the next page. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the church windows and sending dust devils spinning down the empty street. For the past 16 years, he read, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper, I have been the anonymous benefactor who has helped every single family in this town during your darkest hours. When the Henderson children caught scarlet fever and the medical bills nearly destroyed that family, I paid them. When the Morrison Ranch almost failed during the drought of '76, I bought their debt from the bank and forgave it. When fire took the Carlson General Store 3 years ago, I'm the one who funded the rebuilding, though you never knew it. Preacher Davy's mouth fell open. Martha Jenkins grabbed the back of the pew in front of her, her knuckles white as old bones. Every Christmas morning when you found those food baskets on your doorsteps, signed only from a friend, that was me. Every time your children received mysterious gifts during hard times, wooden toys, warm clothes, books to read, that was me too. Mrs. Patterson's widow pension that kept her in her little house these past 8 years. I've been paying it from my own pocket, working through the bank, so she'd never know. The church fell so quiet you could hear dust settling on the wooden pews. Even the wind outside seemed to be holding its breath, waiting to hear what came next. The reason I lived so simply, dressed so plainly, kept so much to myself, it wasn't because I was antisocial or bitter. It was because I had a mission. You see, my husband Samuel didn't just leave me this little house when he died. He left me wealthy beyond anything this town has ever seen, and I made a choice to spend that wealth taking care of all of you. Sheriff Bradley had to pause. His throat felt thick, and his eyes were starting to burn. In all his years of delivering news, both good and terrible, he'd never read anything like this. I know you're wondering how Samuel and I could have had such wealth when we lived so modestly. The answer is something that's been a secret for 20 years. Samuel wasn't just a rancher and a store clerk. He was the rightful heir to the Whitman silver mine up in Eagle Canyon, the one everyone in 3 counties believes played out back in '59. Martha Jenkins was crying now, tears streaming down her weathered cheeks like rain on a window pane. That mine never played out. We just told everyone it did to avoid trouble. Samuel had seen what silver strikes did to peaceful towns, the claim jumpers, the violence, the way greed could turn neighbors against each other. So we decided to work it quietly, taking out just enough to live comfortably and help others. When Samuel died, I continued that work alone. The sheriff turned another page, and his eyes widened at what he saw written there. Behind the false wall in my cellar, he continued reading, you'll find something that will astound you. There are sealed envelopes for every family in Cedar Ridge, 47 families in total. Inside each envelope, you'll find the deed to a piece of prime grazing land I've been quietly purchasing over the years, plus enough money to ensure your family's security for generations to come. Sheriff Bradley stopped reading entirely for a moment. He couldn't believe what he was seeing on the page in front of him. When he found his voice again, it was thick with emotion. But here's the condition for receiving these gifts, he continued. They will only be given to families who attend the memorial service that will be held for me 1 week from today. Not because I'm vindictive or bitter, but because I want to teach this town one final lesson about the importance of showing up for each other, even when it doesn't seem to matter. The silence in the church was so complete it felt holy, sacred, like the whole world was waiting to hear what came next. "There's more," Bradley said, his voice cracking. "I've also made arrangements for the construction of a new school for Cedar Ridge, a proper hospital with real doctors, and a library filled with books from back east. But these projects will only proceed if at least half the families in town attend my memorial service, not for the money or the land, but to prove that this community can come together when it truly matters." Martha Jenkins was sobbing openly now, her whole body shaking with the force of her tears. Preacher Davies had removed his hat and was staring at Eleanor's coffin with a mixture of shame and wonder. To Sheriff Tom Bradley, the will continued, "I leave my deepest gratitude and my ranch. You were the only person in this entire town who ever knocked on my door just to check if I was all right. You never asked for anything, never expected anything. In return, you simply cared about a lonely old woman because it was the right thing to do. The ranch and all its livestock are yours, along with my eternal appreciation for your good heart." Bradley's knees nearly buckled. Eleanor's ranch was worth more than he could earn in 15 lifetimes of sheriff work. But that wasn't what made his hands shake. It was the kindness in her words, the recognition of something he'd never even thought about as special. To Martha Jenkins, he read through his tears, who always smiled and said good morning when she passed my house. "Even though I rarely responded, I leave you my grandmother's complete jewelry collection and enough money to live comfortably for the rest of your days. Your small kindnesses meant more to me than you'll ever know." Martha was crying so hard she could barely breathe. All those mornings when she'd waved at Eleanor's window, never knowing if anyone was watching, never expecting anything in return, it had mattered. It had all mattered. And to Preacher Davies, Bradley continued, who never once questioned why I didn't attend church services, who respected my need for privacy and always treated me with dignity when our paths crossed time, funding the complete restoration of this beautiful old church and leaving you enough money to ensure it remains a beacon of hope for the next century. Preacher Davies fell to his knees, right there in the aisle, overwhelmed by the generosity and by his own shame at having judged this woman so wrongly. "But I'm not finished yet," Sheriff Bradley read, turning to what appeared to be the final page. "There's one more secret I need to share, one that will shock you more than all the rest combined." The church felt like it might explode from the weight of the silence. Even the dust motes seemed to stop dancing in the afternoon light. "The reason I kept to myself all these years wasn't just about protecting my privacy or maintaining my secret mission of helping others. You see, I wasn't always Eleanor Whitman 25 years ago. I was Eleanor Mackenzie, and I was married to one of the most wanted outlaws in 5 territories. If the church had been quiet before, now it was like being inside a tomb. Even their heartbeats seemed too loud. My first husband, Jack Mackenzie, robbed banks and stagecoaches from here to California. But what nobody knew, what I've never told another living soul until this moment, is that every single dollar he ever stole, I have spent the last 20 years returning, not to the banks, who were often more crooked than the outlaws who robbed them, but to the families who were truly hurt by those crimes. Sheriff Bradley's hands were shaking so hard he could barely hold the paper steady. The widow in Mil, whose husband was killed during the bank robbery there, I'd been supporting her and her 3 children for 17 years. The stagecoach driver who was shot and crippled during the Tucson holdup paid for his medical care and supported his family until the day he died. Every victim of Jack Mackenzie's crimes has been secretly compensated, though they never knew where the help was coming from. The truth hung in the dusty air like gun smoke after a shootout. Nobody moved, nobody spoke, nobody even seemed to breathe. Jack died in a gunfight with federal marshals outside Phoenix, and I inherited not just his stolen wealth, but his terrible guilt. I changed my name, came to Cedar Ridge, and began the long work of making amends. When I met Samuel Whitman, I told him everything. He was a good man who helped me carry that burden. When he passed, I continued the mission alone. Sheriff Bradley looked up from the paper, his eyes scanning the empty pews, as if he could see all the absent townspeople sitting there. So you see, he continued reading, the woman you thought was strange and unfriendly was actually someone carrying the weight of another person's sins. Someone who had dedicated every day of her life to healing the wounds caused by someone she once loved. I kept to myself, not because I didn't care about people, but because I cared too much. I was terrified that if anyone discovered my past, they would reject not just me, but all the good I was trying to do. The sheriff's voice broke completely for a moment. When he found it again, it was barely a whisper. I lived in fear every single day that someone would recognize me, that my past would catch up with me and destroy not just my life, but the lives of all the people I was trying to help. So I became invisible. I became the woman you could ignore, the widow you could dismiss, the neighbor you didn't need to know. And in becoming invisible, I was able to do more good than I ever could have done in the light. Tears were streaming down the sheriff's face now, dripping onto Eleanor's carefully written words. In the bank vault in Millerville, there's a safety deposit box registered under my real name. Inside, you'll find proof of everything I've told you, newspaper clippings about Jack's crimes, records of every family I've helped, letters I wrote, but never sent to each of you, explaining how much your smallest kindnesses meant to me. He turned to the final paragraph, his voice growing stronger again as he neared the end. To the children of Cedar Ridge, I want you to know that those mysterious gifts you received over the years, the wooden horses, the warm mittens, the picture books, came from someone who watched you play in the streets and remembered what joy looked like. Your laughter echoing through this town was worth more to me than all the silver in my mine. I may never have had children of my own, but in my heart, every one of you was my child. The silence that followed was profound, sacred, like the moment right before dawn when the whole world holds its breath. I'm dying as I lived these past 20 years. Sheriff Bradley read, in conclusion, surrounded by people I love who don't love me back, not because they're cruel, but because they never really knew me. Don't mourn for the lonely old woman you thought I was. Instead, celebrate the fact that for 20 years, an angel walked among you. She may not have had wings or a halo, but she performed miracles every single day. The sheriff looked up from the paper one final time, his face wet with tears that caught the dusty sunlight streaming through the church windows. And Eleanor's very last words are these: "Thank you for letting me call Cedar Ridge home, even when I couldn't let you call me family. Learn to see the angels walking among you before it's too late. With all my love, Eleanor Margaret Whitman." The silence that followed was like nothing any of them had ever experienced. It was the kind of quiet that changes you, that reaches into your chest and rearranges everything inside. Martha Jenkins was the first to speak, her voice barely a whisper through her tears. "All those years," she said, "all those years I waved good morning, and she was watching. She was always watching." Preacher Davies struggled to his feet, his hat clutched in his trembling hands. "We have sinned," he said quietly, "not through malice, but through blindness. We had an angel among us, and we treated her like a ghost." Sheriff Bradley carefully folded Eleanor's will and placed it back in his vest pocket. "I think," he said slowly, "we need to postpone this burial. Something tells me we're going to need a much bigger church for next Sunday's memorial service." And he was absolutely right. When word of Eleanor's will spread through Cedar Ridge, and it spread fast, the way shocking news always does in small towns, something remarkable happened. It wasn't just shame that drove people to Eleanor's memorial service the following Sunday. It was wonder. It was gratitude. It was the kind of awe that comes when you realize you've been living next to a miracle without knowing it. But the crowd that gathered that Sunday wasn't just from Cedar Ridge. Word had traveled beyond the town borders, carried by traders and travelers who'd heard the incredible story. People came from neighboring settlements, from counties away, from as far as Denver and San Francisco. They came to honor a woman who had lived among them like a shadow, but who had been more real, more present, more loving than any of them had ever imagined. The new church that Eleanor's will had funded, built in record time by every able-bodied man in 3 counties, was packed beyond capacity. People stood in the dusty street outside, hats in their hands, heads bowed in respect for a woman who had redefined what it meant to be a neighbor. When they finally laid Eleanor Margaret Whitman to rest, it wasn't in the lonely silence she had expected. She was surrounded by hundreds of voices raised in hymns, by tears of gratitude instead of tears of grief, by a community that finally understood what they had lost and what they had gained. The silver mine she left behind continued to support Cedar Ridge for decades. The school she funded educated generations of children who grew up knowing Eleanor's story. The hospital she established saved countless lives. And the library she endowed became a gathering place where people came not just to read, but to remember the woman who had shown them that the greatest heroes are often the ones who choose to remain unseen. Sheriff Bradley kept Eleanor's ranch, but he turned it into something she would have loved, a place where orphaned and abandoned children could come to live and learn and grow, supported by the continuing wealth from the silver mine. He never married, dedicating his life instead to carrying on Eleanor's mission of quiet service. Martha Jenkins lived out her remaining years in comfort, but more importantly, she became the keeper of Eleanor's story. She made sure every child in Cedar Ridge grew up knowing about the angel who had walked among them, about the importance of kindness to strangers, about the power of seeing people as they truly are, instead of as they appear to be. And Preacher Davies spent the rest of his ministry delivering sermons about hidden angels, about the divine sparks that shine in ordinary people, about the sacred responsibility to look closer and love deeper. He talked about Eleanor Whitman every Sunday until the day he died, ensuring that her lesson would never be forgotten. The story of Eleanor Whitman spread far beyond Cedar Ridge. It was told around campfires and dinner tables, written up in newspapers and dime novels, passed down from parents to children like a sacred trust. She became a legend, built on gunfights and gold strikes, but the kind that matters, the kind that changes hearts and minds and souls. Her grave in the Cedar Ridge Cemetery became a place of pilgrimage, where people came to remember that every person they passed on the street carried hidden stories, fought invisible battles, and possessed untold capacity for love. Eleanor had taught them that the most powerful force in the world isn't violence or wealth or fame, it's the quiet decision to care about others even when nobody's watching, even when nobody knows, even when nobody seems to care in return. Years later, when visitors asked about the elaborate headstone that marked Eleanor's grave, the townspeople would tell them the story. They'd explain how no one came to her first funeral, but how her real funeral, the one that mattered, was attended by hundreds. They'd talk about how her memory lived on, inspiring new generations to look beyond the surface, to see the hidden angels walking among them, to understand that sometimes the most extraordinary people are the ones who work hardest to appear ordinary. Because that's the truth. Eleanor Whitman taught them that heroism doesn't always announce itself with trumpets and fanfare. Sometimes it whispers, sometimes it hides, sometimes it spends 20 years secretly healing a broken world. One act of kindness at a time, asking nothing in return except the chance to make things a little bit better. No one came to her funeral that September day, but Eleanor Whitman's real funeral lasted for decades. As her story continued to change lives, touch hearts, and remind people that angels walk among us every single day, we just have to have eyes to see them. And if stories like this one move your heart, if they remind you to look a little closer at the quiet heroes in your own life, well, you know what to do.